there's a combination of problems. The end of oil, climate challenges, and depletion of our soils through chemical farming. And I think the answer is sustainable communities, sustainable cities, cities working with the area around them. And one of the things that's going to power that shift is starting with our own renewable energy, because it's an economic generator. Energy is the basis of our society.
Well, we're farming the sun as well as the land underneath. And on this site, it works brilliantly. It's very heavy ground. We were growing arable crops before, but really it's suitable. It's a dairy farm. It should be here. We should be growing grass. So now we're back to growing grass on land that consumed a lot of diesel to produce any crops. And it's being grazed really as it ought to be. Solar came to the view of the poultry industry because we use a lot of power, and generally through the summer we use more, so it fits perfectly with the modelling of solar production, our usage. So that's where we started and looked at putting some on the shed roofs, which quite a few growers are doing. But when we started speaking with AEE, it just seemed apparent we had a suitable site. We could do a field-based solar park, and we connected the poultry farm to that from the field, and that works brilliantly. So they supply us quite a lot of our power. Obviously during the daylight hours we're fully covered with solar power, and that works well for both of us.
As we graze sheep under the panels, they seem to be quite happy, especially in the summer. They lie under the panels for the shade, because sheep like shade when it's really hot. And in the winter, they shelter from the rain, the winds and the weather.
So it's better than having just an empty field then?
Oh, much better.
Do you think the sheep prefer it?
Yeah, I do. Don't destroy wildlife, definitely not. We've got rabbits in here, badgers in here, foxes in here. We thought the fence would keep the fox off for the lambs and that, but still foxes here. Plenty of wildlife.
So the bigger wildlife, like the deer, are kept out. The fence is slightly off the ground to allow the hares to come underneath, but the small birds have enjoyed the grasses that are growing, the hedgerows, and it's got a protected environment for them, undisturbed now. The sheep are here, so I think the wildlife will benefit. The hares are breeding, which they weren't doing very well on the farm before. So I think it has provided a really good enclosure for local wildlife to flourish.
We don't believe we can protect the village in the sense of putting up some sort of ring fence around it. Expansion is going to happen. It's government policy, regional policy, our local authorities' policy. And so over the past 6 years, what we've been doing is working to reduce the impact of that on the village and make the best possible hand out of the fact that it's going to happen. I think most people would see energy as simply coming out of the national grid and being produced elsewhere. But increasingly one can see that these big projects aren't particularly robust, and the idea of producing energy locally may be the way forward. And so the idea of solar panels and other locally produced energy sources is becoming, for some of us, increasingly attractive. And so within the expansion to the village, we're looking to see what opportunities there are to take that forward.
Nuclear's sort of like a dumb option, partly because it's more expensive, partly because it's slow, partly because it's the old mainframe mentality to me. I think the shift is towards communities owning their own energy. It's like the shift from mainframes to microcomputers. In fact, there really is a high-tech revolution going on, and nuclear is part of the old way of doing things.
So we can learn a lot from Germany.
Well, interestingly enough, with wind and solar alone, on a sunny day with a nice breeze at midday, they get more energy than they consume, more electricity than they consume from their solar fleet plus their wind fleet. They don't need their nuclear, they don't need their coal at all, at midday on a sunny day. What does that mean? They're now thinking further on about storage systems and so on.
No one has any problems. I hear very little about it. Even in the local pub, people they don't notice it. I think you have to look for the site to see it, but it's fitted in incredibly well in the landscape, especially now the grass has grown up in between the rows of the panels. It hardly stands out at all, and people carry on with their normal business. I think the biggest fear is the unknown before a project like this takes place, but now it's in and running, and yeah, I don't hear anything locally, which is usually no news is good news.
I think it's pretty well screened by trees and woodlands. It's on the top of a hill and it's level, so we're right on the top, so its visibility is absolutely magic actually. It's a good site, even though I say it myself.
Interestingly, well, its Lynham airfield is very close to us, but now the Hercules have moved. But since they've moved, the airspace has opened up, and there's another Kemble airfield. So a lot of the light aircraft like to come over and have a look, but it's not been any issue. And I think at planning, the MOD were consulted, and they had no problem with it at all. So it doesn't, and even on the ground, we get no glare, no glint. There is no issue with it at all. It doesn't stand out in the sun. AEE were a very good company to work with. Any new project you're always a bit concerned to start with, but AEE turned out to be fantastic. Any small problems or any big ones, there were, as you'd expect, one or two, but there was someone to speak to. You phone up and it was dealt with very quickly, very easily. There was never any issues. They were very friendly, very thorough, and real pleasure to be involved with. They made the project work very well.
They put solar panels on our property, which is good, and they've also done the same for the village hall, the community and the school as well, which is fantastic, I reckon, really. Village hall meeting, or the parish council meeting, we had a round of applause when that was mentioned.
Generally, I think that the village is supportive, although in the nature of things, slightly indifferent towards renewable energy. Partially there's the feeling that it's somebody else's problem. There's an argument that it's all of our responsibility if we want to use the energy to make sure it's sourced responsibly.
The renewable energies that are becoming available are becoming cheaper than the old sources of energy. So again, no sane community is going to carry on doing the old thing when you simply don't need to. This is a really interesting time. We're at the start of a solar revolution. Solar energy has been growing so fast over the last few years, it's just reached the point of exponential takeoff. Within only 10 years, we'll be getting most of our energy, our electricity, from the sun. And we'll have learned a huge amount about local energy. 10, 15 years ago, people didn't have their own computers. Now everybody's got smartphones. I think this is the time to learn about solar. It'll change over time. And I think in 30 years, you won't see solar farms around. We'll have found out how to make our power more and more concentrated, more and more beautiful ways. This is just the start, but let's go for it now. Let's have our own energy supply and then see where that takes us.